Today we'll be talking about balancing the need to monetize versus producing a user experience. My name is Michael Doobie. I'm from HBO. And what I do at HBO is I'm kind of overseeing the back-end implementation across linear and nonlinear. Next to me, to my left here, I have Jeremy Tillman. I know we see up there that his title is Chief Product Officer. He's actually just gotten promotion. He's now CEO of Digit. So that's great. Congratulations. To his left, we have Joe Inzerillo, who is the SVP of Major League Baseball. On his left, we have Pete Scott, who's the VP of Emerging Media at Turner Sports. And last but not least, at the end, we have Brian Griffin, who's the VP of Video Product Management at Viacom. So today, when we look at what we're seeing up here as the description, there's a lot of meat in there. And so what we're going to try to do is just try to prompt some conversation between us to go over what I feel are some of the major points there when we're trying to find that harmony or that balance between developing a product that your end users find compelling versus actually monetizing or paying for that, or what's the return on investment there. So we've got some speaking points here. And I guess the first one that I want to talk about and see if we can get some good stuff going here is revenue versus innovation. So fellas, when we're trying to figure out our product offerings, does revenue drive innovation, or does innovation enable your revenue? And so, maybe I can start off with Jeremy, and he can speak on that.
Sure. So I work for a Silicon Valley venture-funded startup. Therefore, innovation drives revenue. In fact, revenue is questionable in everything we do. Just ask Instagram. But what we're up to, just since most of you probably haven't heard the company, we're building, and anything you see on the internet about us is fairly outdated. We're building a hyper-personalized social TV discovery platform. So basically an app that helps you just discover content. And I'm not going to pitch Digit any more than that, but that's the world I'm in. Our belief on what we're doing is to help people find content. So if I want to monetize that, there's only a few ways. I either sell the app, advertising, or sell the data around the app. We don't believe it's an app that people should be paying for. I don't think, other than the checkout line at the grocery store, people don't seem to be spending much money on actual purchasing TV guide content. There's free guides on the internet. There's a free guide built into your TV set. I don't think we can monetize that way. But when I look at ad-supported and data-supported businesses, if we're remotely successful and we know what content people are searching for and how they find it and how they queue on their DVRs and if they're buying it from video-on-demand platforms versus subscribing to Netflix versus Hulu Plus, I think we sit on a mountain of data, much like a Nielsen-style company, where our belief is that if Nielsen can make $4 billion a year off the big screen, there's a whole lot more money sitting on the table right now surrounding second screen and even still big screen when it comes to over-the-top platforms. So we see that as a possibility, but I can't go make that money until I have a lot of users. These guys all already have a lot of users. I don't have really any. So our entire focus is build something really, really innovative, something people love to use, want to use every day before we can turn that into any kind of revenue model.
Great, thanks. Joe, do you have any thoughts on Major League Baseball's view of innovation versus revenue?
Well, I think that one of the things that I would put on there is profit versus revenue versus innovation, right? And so that's like another dimension of this. And so if you're a venture-funded company, chasing revenue or chasing users, depending on the type of business, is typically what you're looking for, and you're sort of incentivized on a multiple of revenue, typically, not necessarily of revenue or multiple of profit.
Yeah, what is this profit thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's where the unicorns live.
Okay. I get it now.
So, the notion of profitability, I think, is a big thing. And so, to me, it's like innovation and profitability are the thing that gets balanced. And I'll give you an example. Like Android is an interesting platform. It'd be great to do a lot of innovation, but there's not a lot of profit in it. And so that's one of those things where, where do you draw the line? Because you can sell things for sure. There's a market for everything. Like every device that's out there, practically, even BlackBerries get bought by somebody. at some level. The question is, can you as a content provider make money on that? And so I think what we've looked for is really targeted innovation where we think that there's an opportunity for profit as opposed to revenue. And that doesn't mean that we don't go wide. We don't want to abandon folks, but we try to have feature sets that maybe innovate on platforms that we think are more profitable, and then on the platforms that aren't as profitable, still provide a solid offering, but not necessarily try to drive the innovation curve as hard as you're going to try to drive it on the ones that are profitable.
So for us at Turner Sports, we run a couple digital businesses on behalf of leagues. And I would say for us, revenue enables innovation. So what I mean by that is, I run up here to New York quite often from Atlanta to talk to our sales guys to figure out what's that bright gold shiny object that we need to be thinking about that I can go help monetize on behalf of a particular brand. So I have a great team in Atlanta, and we sort of listen to what advertisers are looking for. A lot of times we're on the same congruent path of sort of providing a good experience for the advertiser, and that does fund a lot of my innovation. And we work with cable operators as well. We are a programmer for a lot of cable companies, and we have to work closely with them. So for us, it's sort of two-pronged between the sales guys and the cable operators of where our revenue comes from, and how we leverage whatever products that we build and innovate is consistent with those two, big parties. For us, that's kind of how I get stuff done in Atlanta.
Cool. At Viacom, I'm part of a centralized team, so we build a lot of things centrally and try to have all of our individual brands reuse them. And so we're in a little bit of a mixed scenario where sometimes we're able to innovate from our central group, take something out to one of the brands or the sales organization, and like, oh, that's interesting. They've been able to go and sell those types of things. And then it's also the reverse, where sometimes someone's interested in a platform. I think a lot of kind of what you said around like Android. There's a lot of interest in Android. If someone wanted to actually put the revenue up or the money up to go do something, we would go and kind of start building solutions and features for that.
Great, thanks. And so I think as a sort of follow-up to that, traditionally when folks are developing product offerings, and really I see all of what we're doing here is developing products that we're looking for consumers to make use of. Traditionally, you'd have sort of separate efforts between front end and back end. So I think that those lines are starting to blur a bit more. Traditionally, people thought of user experience as what they would see and what they could click on, and really more and more that user experience is also sort of bridging into back-end functionality, which you may agree or disagree with me, but based on that concept, for you folks, do you find that your focus is more toward the front-end presentation, back-end development and infrastructure? At what point do you find that those lines are starting to blur? And how do you separate those efforts internally? Where does user experience enter and lead within your product development, I guess?
For us, we are all about user experience, so much so that we've taken our entire playbook following Apple and some of the award-winning apps that are out there. Is that our perspective, again, speaking purely selfishly, is that right now there's nobody really dominating second screen TV discovery experiences. There's no great iPad app at all. In fact, I think most of them, including our first generation product, are pretty average at best. So we are aiming to create something that is distinct, that's memorable, that just everybody has to have. That's an audacious goal, and I don't know if we'll hit it. I'm pretty proud of what we built so far. But everything we're doing, we're looking at every little detail to make this thing beautiful, easy to use, fun to use, friendly, viral, all the things we need to do. However, it is about discovery. So the content itself matters. If I tell you like shows X, Y, and Z, and you're not going to like shows X, Y, and Z, it doesn't really matter how pretty it is or how easy it is to use. You're eventually going to say this thing doesn't help me. So we have to toe the lines very carefully. But again, as a startup, any startup, your odds are, you see there's like a window and it's closing, and behind that's another window and it's closing, behind that's another window and it's closing. You've got to kind of dive through all three at the same time if you've got any chance of being successful. So we actually have to nail everything perfectly the first time, which is always fun. So I don't think we look at one versus the other, but fundamentally to us, the user experience is everything in the app. It's the content you're being recommended, it's the social features, and it's the way the app itself is experienced by the end user.
Yeah, I think that part of it is that there's there's two sorts of blurring, right? There's the blurring of technology, and then there's the blurring of the folks that actually get the technology done. And so certainly from a blurring of technology, I mean, HTML5 itself has sort of back-end kind of concepts in it that folks that are in that space are really trying to take advantage of, disconnected web app. I mean, the very notion of it is sort of an oxymoron, but yet it exists. And so, we look at it is that they're very, very symbiotic. I mean, they have to work in concert, especially when you start to get to wireless devices. Because now at this point in time, it used to be on the web that you can, way back when maybe not so much, but in the past 5-6 years, bandwidth is plentiful, especially relative to video. And so you could have a gazillion data files out there and have the front end sort of parse through all of them and try to figure it out. But kind of two things happened. One thing happened was people started to take iPads out, and now they're on a wireless connection. And so now you better sous chef those files as opposed to putting them together on the front end, or you're going to have real issues downloading all that content in time. The second side of it is that we've actually bifurcated in platforms you need to go to. And so between Android, iPhone, and the web, we now have 3 different front-end presentations. And so putting all that business logic towards the front end is a pretty bad idea too, because you don't really want to redevelop it on 3 platforms. And so I think the key to the difference between front end and back end is figuring out what functionality goes in what bucket. And so if you do it right, then the stuff that's sort of business logic, common purpose, et cetera, should be sort of located much more towards the back end. And the stuff that's the Chrome that really deals with user interface, user interaction, that's much more likely to be specific to the operating system or the device that you're on should be towards the front end. And skill set wise, that means that the people change. And so you used to have folks, for example, that were totally like design-centric, usability-centric, that only really worked on the front end. And now those folks need to come back and start working on the back end. And so from a skill set standpoint, getting back to my second point, we sort of re-architected the way it works, where we have a lot more smaller composite teams of folks that are ultimately responsible end-to-end for the product. And that will include server-side folks and client-side folks and everybody in the middle. And that way you get that sort of team building of yin and yang, like, okay, well, I'll put this on the back end, I'll put this on the front end. And that's really, I think, where you drive stability, which is the other thing that gets into innovation. If you can't be stable, then you can't be innovative. And backend is a great example for us. I mean, we may have an average game that's got 100,000 users in it watching a game, and all of a sudden it becomes a no-hitter. Well, all of a sudden I might get 1 million folks in that game. And so you have to be able to scale, otherwise the user experience at the time that's most crucial goes down. And so if you're not as focused on the back end and you're more focused on the front end without having the back end infrastructure to pull it off, you wind up in a really bad situation, whereas the opportunity for you to shine becomes your biggest failure. And so for us, we see them all very symbiotically, and they have to work that way, and you have to make sure that it's balanced, that the front end's not doing things that the back end can't accommodate.
And Joe, it strikes me that it's just as it would be in a breaking news environment. It must be difficult to sort of plan for that unknown, spike in traffic, right?
Sure. Well, there is no plan. I mean, that's the bottom line. Like folks that have the notion of like traffic planning, traffic engineering, and things like that, I mean, can only really be at some level. If it's anything less than everything that you could put out there, at some point you're really just planning for a lack of success. Not necessarily failure, but a lack of success. We as we've done more and more of this stuff, we do a bunch of other things for other folks too. So not just baseball, we do other companies we do things for. And so we did something for the Super Bowl, I think was a great example of it, where during the Super Bowl, there was an ambush campaign by Coca-Cola where the Coca-Cola Bears were sort of reacting to the Super Bowl. They had a couple of ads in the actual game, and then there was a whole online experience where you could watch the Cola Bears fall asleep during the Pepsi commercials and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so we actually ran the back end for that. We did all the streaming. We worked with the agency, Coca-Cola's agency, Wyden Kennedy, and put that whole thing together. And that was a great example of nobody knew any idea of how it was going to work. And so folks were very concerned about, okay, well, how do we dimension, how do we do this, and how do we do that? And when it came to the streaming side, we're like, we don't really build anything that can't go to the maximum extreme that we could possibly get from a CDN standpoint, et cetera. And so we just build it that way. And sure enough, they get 9 billion folks that are trying to look at it. And so when that winds up happening, the video side of it scaled very well, but some of the other components didn't scale as well because they were sort of trying to peg a traffic number. And like I said, I think it's a mistake, in general. Like you really just have to build on fundamentally scalable technologies, get the right partners, and then it's off to the races. But anytime that you try to mitigate what kind of scale you can possibly have, I think you run the risk of, again, your biggest opportunity to shine becomes your biggest opportunity to fail.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to Unicorn Land. And in Unicorn Land, we have shamrocks and pots of gold and rainbows. And it's funny, I'm trying to sort of bridge the gap at a large television company like ourselves between the engineers with a lot of pens in their pockets and all the interesting web developers and bring them all into unicorn land, where we treat video as a bit. And like Joe says, the new engineer of today is different from the engineer 5 years ago. So your front and your back end, there's a great term called creative technologists. And I love that term because that's basically what we've become, that bonds the front end to the back end. And at Turner, we stress that from the guy bringing downlinking the signal via fiber or satellite, hits a router, hits a live encoder, goes off to the many different bit rates, how does someone understand that whole process? So like Joe says, the front end is designed to really basically make that the best experience that they possibly can. So it's a lot of education. ESPN's done a really good job of basically bringing in their engineers and their webmaster platforms and really bonding them together and doing a lot of teaching. And we've had to do that a lot at Turner. So I think that's a big component for us, and I would encourage folks in this audience that if you have, just do beer and barbecue, and bring the engineers and the web developers together, and they can poke at each other and they can figure out who does the best. But that's where people sort of have to let go their fiefdoms and say, okay, this is how we're going to make these things work together. And then I think you'll have a really successful front end and back end because everybody knows what they're doing.
And I've, Pete, I find that that's a problem in a lot of organizations I've been in too, is that as we're evolving, you've got a lot of disparate roles that are bucketed and they don't really understand what the other is doing, and it can create problems when everyone isn't there on the same page.
Sure.
And
so we should call it Unicorn Land. You guys can use that and take that back to all your different. We're going to get together and discuss Unicorn Land.
At Viacom, every single request now is how do we do something multi-platform? It's got to be here, it's got to be everywhere. And from a video point of view, it's a lot of the same things that you guys have talked about, which is, how can I get more of my business logic created server side so that on the client side I don't have to worry about figuring that out, rebuilding that every single time. And then also it alleviates some of the issues of a lack of knowledge of how exactly video works on Android 2 versus Android 4. Someone just says, hey, I just want it to work on Android everywhere. Just make that happen because I've got a great idea and we're going to go monetize it and sell it. And so the more that I can worry less about every single instance of every single consumer experience, the better setup for success Viacom's going to be on whatever platform that is distributing. As far as backend, other parts of the backend, encoding is a really big part of of having a good encoding strategy of being able to deliver multi-platform, and that is obviously for your own content, but also for the advertising that goes along with that. And I think what we've seen is on the advertising side of things, primarily in a VOD space, is that a lot of the trafficking tools and some of that stuff really aren't set up as well as they ought to be for multi-platform distribution. And so again, we kind of look at, okay, server side, how can we start, creating solutions that can kind of take care of the issues that might be further downstream with some third-party network.
And so do you find that that's sort of driving you folks to develop your own ad platform internally, or? I mean,
we always try to really be dialed into what should a media company be actually building versus what should we be buying from someone. So I think it takes a lot to build your own ad network. I wouldn't say we would go that far, but certainly there are parts of the ad delivery workflow that we're going to build and optimize.
Sure, great. The next point that I wanted to touch on was enhanced playback. And so, more and more consumers are expecting content to be delivered across, many devices in a unified and personalized experience. So as we're all sort of planning our increased end user functionality and just a more complex user experience across a number of platforms and devices, some of them lend themselves to a sort of a single screen viewing experience, and others are enable driving eyeballs back to your living room television or set top. So what are some of the ways that we're expecting to derive the greatest value from an enhanced playback of content? And Certainly, even if your app isn't centric to this, I know that you've probably got a lot of opinions on this.
I do have a lot of opinions on it. My first statement is I think this is a very cautionary area. I think I'm seeing this mad scramble to create second screen experiences for everything, and I'm a strong predictor that we'll see a lot of consumer backlash. One of my colleagues, I don't know if he coined the term, but it's the first time I heard it. He said that we're starting to have a virtual coffee table, and the analogy works like this: if you think about your coffee table at home, you've got 7 remotes on it, and that just kind of sucks, and that's not going away anytime soon. And we've tried, but it's not going away anytime soon. Now we're starting to have our iPads littered with apps, right? You're going to have your Simpsons app and your MLB app and your HBO Go app and your, in addition to your HBO Go app, you'll probably end up with a Game of Thrones app, and then there'll be the Modern Family app, and it just, and beyond that, and you also have your Mezos and your GetGlues and people like us just trying to annoy you to death. And I think it's terrible, and I think we all need to really watch out for it. At the end of the day, content is king, right? And I think it's really important to think about the specific nuances of the content itself, right? And I'm sure Joe can talk about, I'm a huge hockey fan. I used to be a big baseball fan, but as I said earlier, I was an Expos fan, and I lost my very bitter. So I've doubled down on hockey. You can guess where I'm from. And when I'm watching a game, I love the stats. I don't want them littering my screen, right? This is such a great place to give me stats and every in-depth thing and ability to view replays and all that. When I'm watching Game of Thrones, God, if there's anybody that wants me to use a hashtag or some other thing I'm supposed to do at any moment in that show, are you kidding me? Right? It's like, so think of those as the end of the spectrum. And then everywhere in between, you have different types of content, right? Big Brother and American Idol and whatever Housewives things are happening are radically different types of programming than House and CSI and Psych, which are, again, radically different programming than 30 Rock and The Office and et cetera. And I think, I don't know exactly which spectrum everybody here is representing, but whatever you read, don't take a blanket one-size-fits-all approach to enhanced content. There are plenty of shows that do not need to be enhanced. 12,000 hours a day of programming happen in everybody's house. We do not need apps to correspond to all of that. So please use good judgment is my only advice I can give on the topic.
Yeah, at some level, I 100% agree. Certainly.
I win.
Not so fast. I'm still bitter about Montreal, too. About you being bitter about Montreal, that is. But at some level, I totally agree.
I also blame the city for that problem.
Cool. Everybody. Blame Canada. At some level, there's no question that, again, we don't need a proliferation of apps. I mean, the problem is that a lot of the apps out there are really, solutions looking for problems. And in that case, I 100% agree that they shouldn't be there. However, I do work for baseball, and I do believe our sport is cool and special enough that it deserves better than an up-down on a remote. And so I don't want to be inside of some app that's monolithic, that's like, okay, here's a channel, there's a channel, etc. I want to make a compelling, awesome experience. And if you look at our iPad iPhone offering, we're the top grossing app in the iOS ecosystem since the iTunes stores existed over all these years. We're one of the top selling apps year after year.
Over Angry Birds?
Yeah, we beat Angry Birds 2 years ago. We beat them.
That's cool.
Top grossing. And so, folks like it. They like to have it. It's designed to run a couple of different ways. So, for example, on the iPad, you can have an MLB.TV subscription and watch it totally disconnected. And in that case, you can put the stats on the screen. You can take them away. You decide what you want to do. If you're watching on your big screen, you can go into Game Day, which is basically our sort of simulated graphics, stats laying over the top, things like that. And we're working on even more and more enhanced ways of synchronizing that so that it runs in parallel, although right now it's pretty close to parallel, even when you're watching on a different device. And so I think that, I was on another panel a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was like, well, hopefully all this stuff, this encoding and all this can get tamped down, and people are just going to decide on something. And I think the truth is that we're now in a world where everybody expects choice. And so everybody decides how they're going to want to consume content. And we can either choose to provide them tools to do that with, or we can risk being obsoleted. I mean, even in a 130-year-old plus sport, if we're not relevant for the next generation, then at some point that will come to bear on us. Whether it's ticket sales or television ratings or app sales or whatever it is, that will take effect. And so I think the key to it is just make sure that you're doing something for a purpose. And so rather than decide that you're going to have, Game of Thrones app, not to pick on Game of Thrones, but since we talked about it, that its sole purpose in life is to have Facebook and Twitter integration, which is absurd, then don't do it. But there are things like, for example, baseball or like American Idol or something where there's more content that is being produced that you're not seeing, that maybe that makes some sense. And maybe the Game of Thrones app is really something where it's got webisodes. I think a great example, I think AMC did a great job with Walking Dead. And so I think that was an example of it wasn't so much about what happened with the show, but there were little webisodes and things like that that bridged you between shows that were really designed not so much as a companion, like I'm going to look up, look down, look up, look down kind of thing, but more trying to tell the story that you couldn't necessarily see other ways. And that's where I think that ultimately fans of something are going to want to go deep. And so to try to provide that experience in a deep way, I think is an important thing, because people that identify with that brand don't necessarily want to only consume it on this big screen that they're going to see once a week. They want to consume it all other times. They want to associate with other folks. And so I think if you have a purpose to do it and you give people the opportunity and the tools to do it, that's great. But don't shove it down their throats. Don't make it all one or one size or in this package is the way that you have to get it. And so I think there's actually a lot more room for innovation than maybe Jeremy does as far as different things, but I don't necessarily think that it's companion-centric. I think it's brand and content-centric as opposed to device-centric or experience-centric.
I don't disagree. So first of all, I completely support the concept of an MLB app. I think in all the scenarios mentioned, it makes perfect sense. Going back to your comment on Game of Thrones, I don't know why you need an app for extra content. Anyone here a fan of The Office? Okay, so have any of you liked The Office on Facebook? Okay, if you do, after every single episode, there's a webisode, and it's just there on Facebook. And Facebook is effectively an open platform. When you have 800 million people using something, it's kind of standardized. So, I don't need an Office app. All the content's there. It's actually in a place I go to semi-frequently. And so I think that's a perfect example. If I want Walking Dead extra content or Game of Thrones extra content, I just don't want to have to go download an extra thing for that. I'll give my parallel example. I live in San Francisco. We have food trucks. All right, cool if you don't have them in your town. Sorry. Food trucks are awesome. Well, one of my favorites, they have their own app for ordering. And not only do I have to download their app to order, I also have to create an account with it. So now I have a username and password for my local Indian curry burrito truck. I'm not kidding. And not only that, every time I open the app, I have to log in. Right? We're not talking about, it's way afar, but think of that parallel back now to Game of Thrones or Walking Dead. By the way, I like Game of Thrones. I'm not meaning to pick on it. I'm using it as the example. There's no reason yet stated for a Game of Thrones app. Now, if there were a Game of Thrones game, and it was, like Infinity Blade, but customized for Game of Thrones or whatever, it's a big adventure, well, that makes a lot of sense. But to me, giving people more content and then siloing it into yet another walled garden place where people do not want to be walled gardened, I think that I just don't think that it's going to win you fans in the next generation.
Yeah, but I think it all depends. To that point, I think it really depends on what your content is, right? And so when you're talking about it's a little tiny webisode and it's a standalone piece of video that just could be on TV if they had the time buy or whatever it was to get it on TV, I think you're probably right that there are other distribution channels that people would wander across. But what we're actually finding with a lot of the market research is people are fairly monogamous about the distribution outlet. And so, folks that are on YouTube don't necessarily cross over as much as we think they do to Facebook to watch content, Twitter, etc. What we do see, though, is that there are rabid folks that want to get more and more content. And so if you're only producing webisodes, I think you're probably right. But if that Game of Thrones app does have a little game or more stuff like character bios or behind-the-scenes photos or things like that, and it becomes an experience that you're really selling, then the truth is that the other technologies that are out there are just not sufficient, I think, to purvey that content.
Like a web page?
I don't think that it is. If you look at what's available on iOS, for example, from a user experience standpoint and a subtlety and a fit and finish standpoint, you were talking about Apple. There's a reason that iOS applications that are well done are slicker than what you can do in a web view.
I agree. We have no HTML5 in our new app. I completely agree.
Right.
I think in the case you're saying, like a Game of Thrones, like all the bios and interactive maps, I think that's the kind of stuff you could do in HTML5 and create a really compelling experience and not To me, it's just I don't want a virtual coffee. I want a whole page of apps that are all one per show. That to me sounds like a disaster.
I think it would be a shame, though, if we spent all this time trying to get video digitized and all these experiences, then we just sit back and say, that's good enough. It's like TV, you know? I think, it's really exciting, all the stuff that's happening out there. There's a lot of crap out there, sure. I mean, and we're just as guilty. We've done a lot of experimentations with all these types of things where you can throw tomatoes at Snooki and those types of things. All right, like...
Does someone really throw tomatoes at her?
Yeah.
That 99 cents for that.
Yeah, in unicorn land, you can go and do that. But, it's all about really measuring the value of that. And if you have some interactive experience that you can quantify back to your business that is either driving linear views, driving digital views, and that revenue, then, go for it and do it. And I think, we should really encourage that. I think also as content is potentially moving, or at least premium content is moving to more of authenticated worlds, whether it's through an MLB app where you have to pay a subscription or TV everywhere. I think continuing to find ways to have added value for that consumer for going through that hurdle, I think it's a great thing. And I think we should try to do more of that. And, that's why we're so lucky to do what we do, because it's not just putting it up on a TV. We've got all these extra things that we can really enhance it with.
And I think it's tribes, right? I always say that. Like, we're in the business of tribes. He's got tribes, I got tribes. Joe's got tribes, and I think it's our duty to basically sort of to do what we can to appeal to those tribes. What's really interesting about Game of Thrones is you actually can do the interactive experience while you're watching the show, because a lot of times you're like, what, where are we going now, or what town, or who's related with what cousin, and you can actually stop and figure out what that stuff is. And Michael, I think the propensity for people to use that interactive feature is actually growing every year, where they moved it from the web, now they moved to the iPad, because they're actually seeing people go in there, and I go in there every once in a while. I'm like, slow down, I got to figure this out. So I think there's certain tribes, whether that be in sports, whether that be in entertainment, that want that information. And I think you're right. At Turner, if we do anything on an IP-connected device, we want it different from what's going on in the TV set. Right. So that's our job. That's our job to basically make that experience better. With Jeremy's stuff, whether that's letting social sort of dictate some of the features of that, that's fine. But that's our job. I mean, that should be everybody's job in here. TV's there, but how do we sort of placate those wonderful tribes that are out there that each one of us has to placate to and really do really convincing content? So I think there is a balance, and I think the virtual coffee table, I totally agree. But I think for some of us, it's like you kind of have to basically answer to both.
Well, it's also, I think there's an analogy here, which is like the DVD, Blu-ray market, et cetera. Like, I think at this point in time, I own at least 104 copies of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Because one came with my Kubrick collection, and one came as standalone. And I got the Blu-ray, and it's got behind-the-scenes extra stuff and all that kind of thing. And like, part of it is nobody's putting a gun for anybody to buy these things, right? Like, I willingly bought all of them, except for the ones that I got gifted that maybe I didn't want. But like, other than that, somebody bought all of them, and so. It's a democratic process. Like, there wouldn't be this content, and it wouldn't be packaged this way if there wasn't an appetite for it. So I don't think that we should be shoving it down folks' throat. And I totally agree that, we're going to overcorrect to the point where there's probably way too much of it out there. But I do think that we're going to not gravitate as far back to there's only one experience or one sort of thing, because I think, I think there's a part of this that's also ageist. When DVD came out, DVD was like my watershed. Like, okay, now I'm actually going to buy some content as an adult, right?
You piss somebody off.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, VHS guy back there, enthusiast, sound guy. He's got an ADAT back there and reel-to-reel too, I tell you. But that was the thing. Like, VHS never made sense. It didn't seem durable. Like, it was going to get eaten by the VCR or whatever. It didn't make sense. But when DVD came out, I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then when Blu-ray came out, I was like, okay, well, that's kind of like that. I like that too. And now I'll buy digital goods and blah blah blah. But I think, if you look at the way that kids consume, they don't consume in a monogamous way. They consume all the stuff all the time, crazy types of things, which is why I think if you look at the success side of it, sports is obviously deep. We have a built-in sort of appetite for folks to get other content. So like, we're kind of cheating because we already have a construct that people understand. But if you look at it from the pure creative and narrative side of it, I think where you've seen a lot of success is where stuff that appeals to the younger demographic, like America's Got Talent and all that kind of stuff, they will go out and they will do it and they'll multitask it in a way that we find dizzying. But if that's what they want to do, then that need should be there. One can argue sort of metaphysically about it, whether or not it's the right thing to do and whether they should be like sitting down in the chair and watching the movie or watching the TV show. But I think that consumers overwhelmingly have said that they want these experiences, otherwise people wouldn't be doing it.
The brands that we have are defined more.
I'm not moving.
They're defined more and more so by not just the content, but the experience that comes along with that content. And so it's not just, hey, do I like the Real World or South Park? It's, okay, I like South Park and I like the South Park apps and I like all the things that I can do around South Park. I like the fact that South Park is on all these different platforms and I can get it so many places. And that's more and more important, and you don't want to lose that consumer. You don't want to go over the top and just do stupid things, right? But you do want to have focused things that you can measure that bring value back to your brands, your content, and revenue.
So just as a little devil's advocate, first, I don't remember who made the comment that consumers love choice. So that's actually proven not to be true. Consumers don't like choice, we just want it. There's this want for choice, but we actually do not like having choice. It's proven time and time again, because choice leads to dissatisfaction, whereas a lack of choice. And I'm not saying communist Russia, I'm just saying, I don't need... By the way, if you haven't read the book, The Paradox of Choice, it's like a weekend read, and it's amazing. But it's highly true. It's like, do I want to think about what I'm going to do with the content after I've consumed it, right? I'm a total movie nerd, so I watch a movie and I launch IMDb and I go read the trivia and vote and do stupid things because I'm a movie nerd. I'm glad I can do that all on IMDb. I don't have to go to the Book of Eli app to read the trivia about the movie and then decide. Now, if I really love something and I want to go find more content, generally I will Google for that. And generally speaking, so will the kids today. And then, so that's point one, is that choice is not necessarily a good thing. And just because people are downloading these things, it's because they're being given them and being told that's what they're supposed to do. And we can see that time and time again. The second statement is, just because there are kids today and kids are multitasking does not mean kids won't age and start single tasking, because that is what happens, for those of us who don't seem to be the kids today, which is this entire room. The average adult sits there in front of their TV and lets the TV play and checks their guide 4 times an hour, and 96% of the time has no idea what they're going to watch next. By the way, true stat, 96% of TV watching is not purposeful. So if we know those things to be the case, and the more we detract from the overall experience of TV, which is fundamentally one of escape, the more we are going to overall detriment the process. And that's my words of warning for you guys who will actually make a lot more money off content than I do. Because again, unicorn equals revenue. Just word of warning. The more you make TV work, the more people will start finding excuses to not watch it because work is hard.
And just to give some folks some insight on HBO Go, our library of content is located in a number of places. So when you think about HBO Go, that's really just a new place for the entire library of content that traditionally you can find in other places. We are finding that, when you think about your cable provider, you can watch HBO on demand through your cable provider. We're actually finding about 4 out of 5 viewers are not making use of their cable VOD version of HBO programming, but instead are going to the HBO Go app, which is tremendous. And, I think part of that is that, we've sort of built a great presentation layer on top of that with some of that enhanced functionality or features. And so folks, when they're deciding, if I'm going to go away from my television and I'm going to go someplace else to watch this content, they're choosing not only what's most convenient, but also what's giving them the best user experience. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that hurts our relationships with the MSOs. If anything, I think that helps to prod some folks that, this is important and folks care about how they're ingesting this stuff. And so it's not just mindless, where can I get it? It's very purposeful. And so our enhanced content, we don't do enhanced features and functionality across all of the shows, but some of them we do. Game of Thrones is one of them. And so for us, one thing that we're also looking into, because when you're talking about baseball and sort of having that second screen, that it's trying to be complementary and not detract. But like you were saying, it's kind of easy. Everything mostly stays in sync, and you're looking for ways to sort of tie that up. We're actually probably doing some of the same stuff that you're doing, and ours is much less linear. So, unless you're watching the televised linear version of Game of Thrones, you're playing it back. And so if you're playing that back on your television, but you also have your iPad, how do we get those two to sort of sync up so that you can have your enhanced features on your iPad, yet leave those eyeballs up on the screen so that as the end user, you're not trying to toggle that on and off. You can sort of, just move your eyes to where that needs to go. And so we're sort of looking into some stuff using audio cues so that your app on your iPad will sort of be able to know where you are at with your televised playback. That's kind of one thing that we're sort of looking at for some of that stuff, which is very cool. I mean, it's great that I think that we're sort of trying to look outside of the traditional box of this stuff. And I think some of this, when folks think about HBO, we don't make a dime off of HBO Go. There's no option for a consumer to come directly to us and give us money to have access to HBO Go. You have to have a fiduciary relationship with your cable or satellite dish provider. And so I think that's a great segue into distribution models. And when you look at some of the folks, the content owners that are up here on stage, we've actually got some disparate distribution models going on, and we have, everyone's got relationships where they're distributing their content and they're getting money from that. But we have Major League Baseball who sort of straddles both. They are selling direct to consumers. They also have existing relationships with distributors who are paying for that content. We have Turner who has, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not selling direct to consumers. Instead, you're sort of like HBO in that way. You're relying really on that relationship with the MSOs and the folks who are paying the larger bucks for bigger deals to distribute that content. And then you have Viacom and MTV at the end, who you're dealing with that, but you're also heavily ad supported. And I know Turner's probably got some ads in their playback of stuff.
Yeah, we're kind of a blend. March Madness is a $3.99 product, and then Adult Swim has very successful, downloadable apps in the game store. So it's tough, right? Because all of us have to sort of straddle. I mean, I think Joe's in a very luxurious position. It'll be very interesting to see, basically on these new MLB rights on the digital side, how much they're willing to give up to potentially eat into his market. Someone smarter than me is going to have to figure that out, and the paycheck's going to have to come out that says if Fox, Turner, ESPN wants to broadcast baseball, they want digital rights, and how will that affect Joe's business? That's going to be a really interesting sort of. And then we pass a lot of those extra rights fees with our cable operators. We try to increase rate when we can to keep us all sort of going. And so it's a straddle. You kind of like one team in your group has to talk to the consumer, but the other one, because it's a larger paycheck that you get from them, that you have to figure out how you make it work in both scenarios. But I think for us, primarily, it's the cable operator right now. And then, if we have brands where they're successful, we'll do the apps for Adult Swim or Cartoon Network or whatever it may be.
Yeah, maybe we can just go back for a second. For some of the folks that are in the audience that don't understand sort of what we're talking about as far as MLB.com goes, in 2000, the owners voted to create my area of baseball, Major League Baseball Advanced Media, and essentially give them all the interactive rights. And at that point, all the television deals that were kind of going around all kind of grandfathered and then blended into the deal where my entity, had 100% of the online interactive rights for online mobile gaming, ticket sales, all that sort of stuff. Back in 2000, it was not a foregone conclusion that would be a profitable thing to do. At this point in time, we'll do over $600 million in revenue this year, and so from 0 to $600 million in 12 years, not such a bad gig. So I do have sort of the luxury. I mean, I still have blackouts. I have things like that we do to protect the local market broadcaster and the national broadcaster. But I am sort of able to go over the top in addition to having the traditional linear distribution. And so the thing that's interesting is what we found is, when it started, this is going to cannibalize, people are going to leave TVs, etc. Television ratings have never been higher, by and large. And we all of a sudden are, found another $600 million for the industry, So we are at a point where now a lot of the other brands that were first like, this is going to cannibalize, then tolerated, now are like, hey, we want some of that interactive action. We are going to have to get into a situation where there's probably more of a plurality. Again, decisions that will be decided way above my pay grade by folks that know such things. But I think that what we have done, at the very least, is we've established a value for those rights. Because back in the day, it was sort of a speculative, okay, well, we'll give you those things. Now we know. We know how much money we can make on it. We know what our growth rate is. And so, trying to build those into a TV deal, I think is interesting. An example of that is, we had a deal with ESPN that ESPN on ESPN3 is now streaming ESPN baseball. And so we cut a deal with those guys. They paid for some rights, and it was part of the ESPN3 offering. Now, in some cases, those games are available on ESPN3 that aren't available on MLB.com. We had a Yankees on Yes deal as well, where some games that are available on Yankees on Yes aren't necessarily available on MLB.com, depending on how the overlap works. And so, it's only going to get more complicated, and I definitely think that you'll probably see it on more outlets, I would think. Again, it's hard to say. But at the same time, again, I think we've done a good job of establishing the value of those things and showing that if you curate those rights and you actually actively go out and try to aggressively do something with them and give it to the customer, that there's a whole thing. And my personal belief is that what we've done is we've found baseball fans that were not going to be part of that other model. There may be some overlap in the middle, but there really is a Venn diagram, and there's this whole chunk of folks, there's a whole chunk of people that want at-bat on their iPhone. They want to check scores. They want to do these things unrelated to what they're doing on television. And so all of those rights with highlights and live look-ins and all that kind of stuff are tremendously important to the long-term health of the business.
You're definitely, you and as well as HBO, they're starting to establish this consumer expectation of, I can get the whole content library online, and then when I can't, I think is a real point of consumer frustration. Yep. When you go to MLB and you're blackout, you're like, oh, okay, and then I spin up the ESPN app and it's there or it's not there, and then if I have, God forbid, I had to go watch a TV and catch a game there or something like that. But I think that's a real struggle when you talk about distribution agreements and who's going to own what's right, and the consumer's quickly heading down a path of, hey, I can go to I've got this one credential, and I can use this thing to get access across platforms. So great, I'm going to expect that there. And then when it's not there, who are they going to be, at odds with? What is that going to? Is it going to be they're upset because the Daily Show isn't on this app, or is it because my cable company doesn't allow me to have access to it here and there? And I think the consumer is going to get a little confused here, if they're not already, for the next couple of years as this all shakes out.
But I think the consumers are the ones that get thrown out the window. I mean, I paid for the NHL service this year, and every now and then the game gets blacked out because Versus, the channel formerly known as Versus, would carry my team in the San Francisco market. Now, in my opinion, since the NHL app was a product of the NHL, it would have been great for them to maybe send me an alert saying, hey, tonight's game you're not going to get to watch, so I could have set my DVR. But they don't do that, and I think that's one of those interesting cases where who really is to blame, right? I mean, easily we could just point at the NHL. I'm not exactly sure how you guys handle those things. As far as I can tell, and I mean this, I think you guys actually handle it better than any other league does right now.
And,
yeah, and I meant to. I don't want to kiss your ass or anything, but. No, he seems like a nice guy.
Well, I think we did enough that we dissuaded that whole thing.
No, but I think I look at you three and your companies as owning that responsibility of pushing down the message to the consumer, right? Like where they should be able to understand without having to know about rights, right? Like so, the NHL people, in my opinion, their app would be better, and they would better serve their customers by saying to me, their customer, the product you want, which you're paying for, and we're trying to give you, isn't where you think it is. We put it over here instead. All you have to do is go over there to find it, right? So if I download a Comedy Central app, I'm hoping that app very clearly is telling me, oh, that one episode of The Daily Show, that's over here.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that the messaging, always could be better. It's one of our active things because it's our number one customer service issue, right? Is blackouts, and so educating the customer is always a challenge and always something that we try to do more and more. It could always get better. Hopefully, consumers will understand more. But I think that part of it is that we skirted very, very close to TV everywhere. We didn't actually use the word there, which is like in my mind Chupacabra land. It's this thing that like is adjacent to Unicorn Land with like a monorail and a rainbow that like connects to it. But part of like the notion of TV everywhere is like, okay, why not internet everywhere? How about it goes the other way? And so if you look at all the major revolutions technologically in the history of this country, certainly, if not in the history of the world, everything happened because the old industry didn't acquire the new one. If the horse and buggy industry got to say whether or not they were going to build a railroad, we'd be riding horses. If the radio guys got to say what went on TV, we'd be listening to the radio, and on and on and on. And so I don't understand necessarily why it's been a foregone conclusion that we're in the situation where the TV everywhere is the gateway. I do definitely believe that a overall credentialing system sort of makes some sense. Like if you pay for rights, you should be able to pay for rights and move them around. I do agree with that. But I don't necessarily know why the TV guys should be the ones driving it. I think ultimately some standard like that has to be more of like, hey, you're an aggregator, you pay for the aggregation, you get these things to kind of creep up wherever it is, and it should go the other way as well. And so you may be able to have, you know, something over here. I mean, one could argue that, like, if you paid for Netflix, why doesn't Netflix come with rights to some of that content when it's streamed on TV? You know, because you already paid Netflix for it. But the truth is that all of these things are really, really complicated, and we are where we are because everybody has been used to this sort of notion of windowing, right? And like, this is going to go over here for a period of time, and then over here, and over here, and over here. And until folks are really ready to like tear down that model, I don't know how it's actually going to work sort of seamlessly, because not every platform is a first-class citizen, realistically. Your iPad's not a first-class citizen to Avengers, because that's in the theater. And then it'll go to airplanes, and then on DVDs, and then it'll come to your iPad. But that may not be what the customers want. I certainly don't think it is, too. I think some folks are somewhat confused. Movies, maybe not so much, but certainly with television, I think so.
And so, you know, folks, in the interest of time, I know I've got some other points here. We've sort of been touching on some of those as we've been going along. I guess one thing would be, from our standpoint, do we feel like these distribution agreements that we have, these existing relationships with distributors, do they hamper or do they help our innovation? Do we find that because we've got these relationships that we sort of freeze when it comes to what we know we can do for the consumer, or do we find that it's driving us to push that? And at least from HBO's standpoint, I can tell you that that pushes us, these distribution agreements, because we know that our content can be, you know, presented in great ways. And so, you know, if we're finding that distributors are slow to respond to make use of the technology that's out there to do so, that we're doing it, and we're not necessarily doing it in a way that hurts our distribution agreements. If anything, we find that it helps, because it keeps people subscribed to HBO if they want access to HBO Go. So for the folks on the panel here, do you feel like, from your standpoint, do these existing distribution agreements, do they hurt or help as you're trying to present content to folks in alternate ways other than, you know, through their local cable company?
A very quick statement. As a Silicon Valley startup, I will say that abandoning the distribution models we have today would be a calamity for the TV industry and the innovation industry. I know that sounds weird, like you're probably expecting me to be like, oh, let people just buy everything they want. I think it would be a disaster. I don't think people realize the amount of money that it takes to make all this. I mean, my always statement is, if you don't agree, by the way, pick the worst reality show you can possibly think of. That's pretty hard to do. But watch the credits for it, okay? The average one will have like 40, 60, 80 names go by. And you start realizing like the amazing amount of money it takes to produce even terrible TV. And then you look at the good stuff. Right? And I've done the analysis. When you count everything from these guys' side of the world all the way over to the actual production of the content itself, all the way to the production of the equipment itself, we're talking about a $500 billion a year plus industry, and I don't think I've got all the numbers in there yet. So leave the walls up is my statement.
You know, I think for us, we want the distributors to be successful, because what it means is if they're successful, our content's going to get to them. There's going to be association between that content and our brands. So, you know, today we're actively looking at how do we help the cable operator get their username and passwords to their users. Mm-hmm. Like, why is that so difficult? So we want to help them do that, and we're going to do that. And because I think it just helps us, it helps them, and like Joe said, you have a centralized place where you can just use your username and password and get the content you want. So I think for us, it's very, very important that, you know, we work with them and try to make them successful.
Mm-hmm. I would completely agree. No surprise, our businesses are very similar. You know, there are definitely some friction points that are introduced today due to the legacy of the deals, and I think, you know, the distribution deals don't move as fast as technology do. You know, we'll lock up, any of us would lock up, you know, 4 or 7 year deal with a distributor. Certain things are going to be set, things are going to evolve. We're going to need to figure out a way to be more nimble in that. But you know, for us to go, you know, and try to do something without a distributor would be ridiculous. And the reality is like the money just isn't there. And like your $600 million that you guys make, that's great.
Right.
But, you know, that's a fraction of what the Viacom's making overall, and a lot of that revenue, we're about an even split between affiliate and ad sales, but if that affiliate distribution goes away, the ad sales is also going to go away as well. Sure. And so I think there are some challenges now, but we definitely want to make it work with our distributors.
And just called you a punk.
Yeah, that's fine. They're big, they're big guys. But just to put it in context, because it's a fair point, I mean, the $600 million is roughly 10% of baseball revenue. So it's a big number, on itself, and it's certainly a material number, but it is incremental. And right. So there's no question about that. I think the biggest thing is there's no question that we want our distributors to be successful. We want folks that are carrying the games, producing them locally, et cetera, to be able to do what they need to do to go and get to the customer. But I also think that what needs to happen overall as an industry is people need to stop confusing sort of monogamy with loyalty, right? And that's where the sort of notion is. It's like, well, if I lock these rights up and these are monogamous rights, then I'll have loyalty. And that doesn't necessarily come. Like, loyalty and monogamy are two very different things, as anybody in the audience who's married probably understands. I'm not, so I can say that. But ultimately, I think that's a reasonable analogy. And so I think that, people, I agree with what you're saying about too much choice is a bad thing, but I do think that people want some choice. But people that are loyal to a brand, like people that love HBO, are going to stick with HBO because HBO provides really good content. People that are baseball fans are going to stick with baseball. Same thing, Comedy Central, you guys, MTV fans, etc. So people that are fans of it are there. I just think the big thing is we have to make sure that what we're doing with the existing distribution deals isn't sort of creating this false orphaning where people are getting a lesser experience because, we look at it a little bit more in a magnifying glass because ours we have constructs around it. We have tradition, we have game, we have expectations that are slightly different than what people might have for something that hasn't been invented yet. And so for us, like I look at it, I got to get to that new fan. I got to get to that kid with his first iPhone, iPad Touch. I got to get him addicted to baseball so that he buys season tickets at some point in time when he grows up. And so for me, it's like this long-term, long sales cycle type thing. And I have to make sure, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to treat it the same, where we have to make sure that the distribution deals make sense in that goal, as well as in the goal of making sure that distributors get what they need out of it.
I completely agree with that. I think that's what these experiences can do, which is drive more engagement, and over time, more and more. And I'm the classic customer of the MLB thing. I started listening on radio, and now I go to more games, I buy more gear, you do that whole thing, and I think that opportunity can also expand outside of sports into a lot of our kind of traditional entertainment broadcasts, and in HBO Go as well. You keep you hooked on Game of Thrones. I'm going to keep coming back to HBO and be like, they understand me, they're going to produce more new content that I'm going to be interested in.
I just want to double up on something Pete said. I think, again, depending on where you are in the ecosystem, helping the customer's never going to understand blackout rights. Never. They think it's bad. They think it's evil. They're never going to understand why ultraviolet works so poorly. They're never going to understand these things, right? At the end of the day, there's an instinctive belief that if you buy something, you own that thing, and whether it's digital or streaming or a disc or not, these are things that you cannot explain to customers, and you shouldn't try to. And fundamentally, those to me are the biggest barriers to getting things to work, is that we're taking shortcomings of deals and putting the blame on the customer for not knowing, right? Like, at the end of the day, I don't blame HBO for the fact that they have deals in place that make it so that I have to use the Comcast app and whatever it is that I have to do in my given hometown. It's not really their fault, but I will say that I will blame HBO and Comcast together for doing such a poor job of explaining to customers what's gone on and expecting customers to read the trades and things like that. I think that's where the entire industry needs to just do a better job. As much as I love your products, that's the one thing I'll call you out on.
Folks, we're actually a couple of minutes over at this point. There were some more points I wanted to get to, and to do some Q&A. I apologize we didn't get to that. I will say search and discovery, I know for us as content owners, is incredibly painful.
It's okay, we're fixing it.
And, just to give you a quick thing, both of my 60-something-year-old parents have cut the cord. They're now using Roku boxes at home. The one complaint that they actually have is that they don't have one place they can search for programming. They have to go into each and individual bucket of content, do the search, and for my 60-something-year-old parents, that causes them to not even search for things. They just go in, they browse, they look, and it's a good thing to sort of keep in mind as we all move forward, because that inability to gracefully search and Digit ideally will be solving that, and my sister's going to get one for her birthday coming up. something like that is, we almost need like a third party to help pull that stuff together, because it'll always be difficult for the content owners to get together and say, I've got a show, you've got a related one. When somebody watches my show, maybe I'll recommend that they watch your show. That's probably never going to happen. So, we need somebody to help to unify some of this stuff, and I think Digit's doing a great job so far. Folks, thank you so much for coming. I wish we had another hour. I think we could have filled it up. Thank you to Joe and Pete, Ryan, and Jeremy.